Have you ever wondered what really goes on in the mind of a woman who decides not to have children? Because it's not just a random preference. That decision reveals far more about a person's psychology than most people realize. Society loves to create narratives about women who make this choice. They're called selfish. They're told they'll regret it, that they haven't matured yet. But what if I told you that psychology and research point in the opposite direction? There is a deep psychological structure behind this decision, and very few people truly understand it. And most of the time, it all starts with a question that seems harmless. So, when are you having kids? Most women smile politely, but something tightens in their chest. Because the moment she answers, "I don't want children," the atmosphere changes. Not dramatically, quietly. A pause that lasts half a second too long. A look that tries to hide disappointment. A comment disguised as concern. "You'll change your mind." Or the one that carries more weight than it sounds. That's selfish. And suddenly, she's no longer just answering a question. She's defending her character, her maturity, her worth as a woman. What most people never realize is this. That conversation is almost never about children. It's about identity, belonging, and the unspoken rules women are expected to follow in order to be seen as complete. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Many women who don't want children have thought more, not less, about life. They've examined themselves more deeply. They've questioned paths others accepted without reflection. And that alone makes people uncomfortable. So today we're going to talk about something that is rarely discussed honestly. 5 psychological truths about women who don't want children. And what those truths reveal about you, whether you want children or not. Because if you've ever felt the need to explain your life choices, if you've ever wondered whether something was wrong with you for wanting a different path, if you've ever felt misunderstood, even in rooms full of people who love you, then this conversation is for you. And if this kind of psychological depth speaks to you, take a moment to subscribe to Emotional Growth. This channel is for women who want clarity, emotional strength, and self-trust without having to justify who they are. So before we talk about the truths behind this choice, we need to understand what's actually happening inside you in those moments. What most women don't realize is that the discomfort they feel in moments like this doesn't start in the mind. It starts in the body. Before you decide what to say, before you choose how to respond, your nervous system has already reacted. Your heart rate shifts. Your breathing changes. Your chest tightens slightly. That's not insecurity. That's biology. The human brain is wired to detect social threat. For thousands of years, belonging meant survival. And for women especially, being accepted by the group often meant safety. So when a woman senses judgment, even subtle judgment, her limbic system reacts automatically. It doesn't ask, "Is this logical?" It asks, "Am I safe here?" And when your choice doesn't match the unspoken script, your body reads that moment as exposure. That's why so many women feel the urge to explain themselves, to justify, to soften the truth, to reassure others, not because they're unsure, but because they've been conditioned to protect harmony, often at their own expense. Now here's where it gets more complex. When a woman says she doesn't want children, it doesn't just challenge expectations. It challenges assumptions people didn't realize they were living by. For some, that decision triggers an internal discomfort they can't name. A quiet question they've never allowed themselves to ask. And when people don't know how to process that discomfort, they project it outward. They question you. They label you. They try to correct you. Not always out of malice, often out of confusion. Because your clarity forces them to confront something uncomfortable. The possibility that life is not one size fits all. And that realization can feel destabilizing. Especially for those who followed a path because it was expected, not because it was chosen consciously. So when you feel judged, it's important to understand this. You're not being evaluated because you're lacking something. You're being questioned because your choice disrupts a familiar story. And disruption is unsettling, even when it's quiet. Now let me ask you something honestly. Have you ever noticed that the pressure doesn't come from strangers as much as it comes from people close to you? Family, friends, well-meaning people who say they're just concerned. That's because the closer someone is to you, the more your choice reflects back on their own. And that's not your responsibility to manage. What is your responsibility? Is understanding what's happening inside you. Because once you do, the confusion fades. The guilt loosens its grip. And the need to defend yourself begins to disappear. Now that we've named the pressure and the biology behind it, we can talk about the truths that sit beneath this choice. And the first one might surprise you, because it challenges the most common accusation women hear when they say they don't want children. Truth number 5, it's not fear, it's self-awareness. One of the first things people assume when a woman says she doesn't want children is fear. Fear of responsibility, fear of commitment, fear of growing up. But psychologically, that assumption couldn't be more shallow. Because fear avoids reflection. And most women who reach this decision have done the opposite. They've reflected, deeply, repeatedly, over years, not weeks. Here's a better way to understand it. Imagine someone at the gym who looks at a heavy weight and decides not to lift it, not because they're afraid of effort, but because they understand their body well enough to know what would injure them. We don't call that fear. We call it awareness. The same applies here. For many women, choosing not to have children is an act of realistic self-assessment, an honest evaluation of their energy, their emotional bandwidth, their values, their capacity to give without resentment. That kind of honesty requires a strong prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for long-term planning, impulse control, and conscious decision-making. This isn't an emotional reaction. It's a cognitive one. And here's something rarely said out loud. It's far more damaging to say yes to a life you don't want than to say no to one you can't fully embrace. Because when someone commits to motherhood without genuine desire, the nervous system doesn't magically adapt. Stress accumulates, cortisol rises, emotional fatigue sets in, and resentment, even unspoken resentment, doesn't disappear. It leaks into tone, into patience, into the relationship with the child. Women who know this, who sense this, aren't running away from responsibility. They're refusing unconscious responsibility. They understand something fundamental about psychology. You can't sustainably give what you don't have. Now ask yourself this quietly. Have you ever noticed that the women who are most judged for this choice are often the ones who know themselves the best? They don't waffle. They don't perform uncertainty to make others comfortable. They speak calmly, clearly, and that clarity can be unsettling, because it exposes how rarely people stop to ask themselves what they truly want, instead of what they were told they should want. This is where self-knowledge becomes threatening, not because it's selfish, but because it's unapologetic. And when a woman trusts her inner truth, she no longer needs external permission to live by it. That doesn't make her cold. It makes her grounded. But here's the next layer, and this is where many people misunderstand the choice entirely. Because from the outside, it can look like rebellion, like defiance. But psychologically, something very different is happening. And that's what we're going to explore next. Truth number 4, it's not rebellion, it's independent thinking. From the outside, a woman who doesn't want children can look defiant, as if she's pushing back just to be different, as if she's rejecting tradition out of impulse, as if she's going against nature. But psychologically, that interpretation misses what's actually happening. Most people live their lives following scripts they never consciously chose. Education, career, marriage, children. The order is familiar, predictable, socially rewarded, and there's comfort in that. Following a script reduces uncertainty. It tells the brain, you're doing what you're supposed to do. You're safe. That sense of safety is reinforced by neurochemistry. Approval releases dopamine. Belonging calms the nervous system. Validation signals that you're aligned with the group. But not everyone's nervous system experiences safety the same way. Some women look at the standard life script and feel something subtle but persistent. Misalignment. Not fear. Not confusion. Just a quiet sense that this path doesn't fit who they are. And instead of ignoring that signal, they pause. They question. They evaluate. That pause is rare. Because questioning a script requires cognitive effort. It requires engaging the prefrontal cortex rather than running on habit. It means tolerating uncertainty without immediately reaching for approval. This is what psychologists often describe as independent cognitive processing. It's the ability to think for yourself even when your conclusion doesn't match the majority. And here's the part most people don't realize. Independent thinking is often mistaken for rebellion by those who never question the script themselves. From the outside, both look similar. Both involve deviation. But internally, they are completely different. Rebellion is reactive. It pushes against something. Independent thinking is reflective. It moves toward alignment. A woman who chooses not to have children isn't trying to shock anyone. She's not proving a point. She's not rejecting others' choices. She's simply choosing coherence between her inner world and her outer life. And coherence is psychologically stabilizing. When your values, decisions, and nervous system are aligned, emotional regulation improves. Stress responses decrease. Serotonin levels stabilize over time. But when you force yourself into a role that doesn't fit, the body keeps score. Chronic misalignment creates low-grade stress, not dramatic enough to be obvious, but constant enough to drain energy, patience, and joy. This is why some women feel more exhausted thinking about motherhood than others feel living it. It's not weakness. It's incompatibility. Now ask yourself something honestly. Have you ever felt pressure to want something simply because everyone else did? And did that pressure feel energizing? Or did it feel heavy? That distinction matters, because excitement and obligation register very differently in the nervous system. One expands you, the other contracts you. Women who listen to that contraction are often labeled difficult, but psychologically, they're doing something adaptive. They're paying attention, and that awareness becomes even more important when we talk about motivation. Because the next truth addresses a misconception that cuts especially deep. The idea that choosing not to have children is selfish, and what psychology actually reveals about that assumption. Truth number 3, the invisible altruism almost no one recognizes. One of the most persistent labels placed on women who don't want children is selfishness. It's said casually, sometimes gently, sometimes with moral weight. And yet, psychologically, that label often misses something profound. Because for many women, this choice is not driven by self-indulgence, but by responsibility, quiet responsibility. There are women who think deeply about the world a child would enter, about emotional inheritance, about financial strain, about mental health patterns that run through families, about instability, not just in society, but within themselves. And instead of romanticizing motherhood, they ask a harder question. Can I give fully without harming myself or someone else? That question doesn't come from ego. It comes from conscience. Psychologically, this kind of decision-making reflects long-term ethical reasoning, the ability to consider consequences beyond immediate emotional reward. And that matters, because society rewards visible sacrifice. Motherhood is celebrated publicly. It's affirmed socially. It's reinforced constantly. That validation activates dopamine, the brain's reward chemical. Praise feels good. Belonging feels safe. But choosing a path that isn't publicly rewarded means giving up those instant affirmations. So when a woman still chooses it, she's not chasing approval. She's prioritizing alignment, and alignment requires strength. Here's what often goes unseen. Some women decide not to have children because they understand the cost of pretending. Pretending they have endless energy. Pretending they won't resent losing themselves. Pretending love alone can override emotional depletion. They know that unprocessed stress doesn't disappear. It transfers, and children are remarkably sensitive to emotional undercurrents. This is where the concept of invisible altruism emerges. Not altruism that earns praise. Not altruism that's photographed or celebrated, but altruism that prevents harm. Preventing emotional neglect. Preventing generational burnout. Preventing resentment from becoming legacy. And there's another layer. Attachment isn't limited to motherhood. Oxytocin, often called the bonding hormone, is released through many forms of connection. Deep friendships, mentorship, caregiving roles, long-term partnerships, community involvement. Some women experience profound attachment and nurturing instincts, just not directed toward raising a child. Instead, those instincts flow into relationships that are chosen, not assumed. Now pause and ask yourself, have you ever felt deeply protective, nurturing, or devoted without wanting to be a mother? That matters, because the ability to care deeply doesn't require reproduction. It requires emotional capacity, and capacity is finite. Women who recognize where theirs belongs aren't withholding love. They're placing it where it can be sustained. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Invisible altruism is easy to dismiss, because it doesn't fit the narrative people are comfortable with. And that's why the accusation of selfishness often says more about the observer than the woman being judged. Because when someone expects you to sacrifice yourself in a specific way, and you don't, they may interpret that boundary as a moral failure, when in reality, it's often moral clarity. Now, there's another fear that tends to surface here. A quieter one. The fear that choosing this path means choosing loneliness. And that fear is powerful enough to override even deep self-knowledge. So next, we need to talk about regret, connection, and what the brain actually does when faced with irreversible choices. Because that fear has a psychological explanation too. Truth number 2. The fear of regret is real, but it doesn't mean your choice is wrong. There is a thought that visits many women late at night. Quiet, persistent, difficult to ignore. What if I regret this when it's too late? This question alone has pushed countless women to doubt themselves. Not because they suddenly want children, but because the brain struggles deeply with irreversible choices. That fear doesn't come from weakness. It comes from how the mind is designed to protect you. When a decision feels permanent, the brain's prediction system activates. Your limbic system scans the future for potential loss. And when uncertainty appears, stress chemistry follows. Cortisol rises. Your thinking narrows. The future begins to look heavier, darker, more catastrophic than it actually is. In that state, the brain doesn't ask, "What feels true to me?" It asks, "What choice will minimize pain at all costs?" This is why fear of regret is not intuition. It's a physiological response. And here's something crucial to understand. Anxiety and truth feel very similar in the body, but they come from different systems. Anxiety comes from the limbic system, fast, protective, reactive. Truth emerges from the prefrontal cortex, slow, reflective, integrative. So when a woman feels fear around this decision, it doesn't automatically mean she wants children. It often means her nervous system is uncomfortable with finality, and that discomfort is human. Now consider this carefully. There are different kinds of regret. There is regret that comes from missing an experience, and there is regret that comes from living a life that doesn't belong to you. The second one tends to be quieter, but far more corrosive, because it's not about an event you didn't have. It's about an identity you abandoned. Many women who struggle later in life don't regret specific choices. They regret years of self-betrayal, years of saying yes when their body said no, years of playing a role that slowly eroded their sense of self. This is why it's important to reframe the question. Instead of asking, "Will I regret not having children?" a more psychologically honest question is, "What kind of regret could I live with more peacefully?" That question acknowledges reality instead of fantasy. Because no path is free from loss. Every life choice closes other doors. What matters is whether the door you walk through aligns with who you are. Now pause for a moment and reflect. When you imagine your future, not socially but internally, where do you feel more calm? Where does your body soften instead of tense? Because your nervous system knows things before your mind can articulate them. This is not about certainty. It's about coherence. And coherence reduces long-term stress. When your inner values and outer life align, serotonin regulation improves. Mood stabilizes. Emotional resilience increases. But when you force yourself into a life to escape fear, that fear doesn't disappear. It simply changes form. It becomes resentment, burnout, emotional numbness. So if fear is present, don't ask it to decide for you. Ask it what it's protecting. Often, it's protecting you from judgment, not from truth. And that brings us to the deepest truth of all. Because beneath every debate about children, regret, and fulfillment, there is a single belief that shapes how women judge themselves. A belief so ingrained that most never question it. And once you do, everything changes. Truth number 1. Female fulfillment has more than one path. There is a belief many women carry quietly. A belief so familiar that it often feels like truth. If I don't become a mother, something essential will be missing from my life. This idea isn't biological. It's psychological. And it's reinforced over time. From a young age, women are shown a narrow image of fulfillment. Motherhood as completion. Caregiving as identity. Sacrifice as proof of worth. And when a belief is repeated often enough, the brain builds pathways around it. That's neuroplasticity. The mind strengthens whatever it rehearses, even when that belief doesn't reflect your inner reality. So when a woman doesn't feel drawn toward motherhood, she doesn't just question the role. She questions herself. Am I broken? Am I missing something? Will I regret this later? But here's the psychological truth. Fulfillment is not a single destination. It's a state of internal coherence. When who you are, what you value, and how you live are aligned, that alignment creates emotional stability. And emotional stability doesn't come from checking boxes. It comes from living truthfully. There are women who feel fully alive raising children. Motherhood expresses something central in them. And there are women who feel fully alive creating in other ways. Building careers, nurturing deep friendships, mentoring, traveling, advocating, loving freely, living spaciously. Neither path is superior. But forcing yourself into the wrong one comes at a psychological cost. When a woman lives out of alignment, the nervous system stays activated. Low-grade stress becomes constant. Joy feels muted. Identity feels thin. You can have a life that looks complete from the outside and feel fragmented on the inside. Or you can live a life that confuses others, but feels deeply right to you. Psychologically, the second option is healthier. Because when the self is honored, emotional regulation improves. Serotonin stabilizes. Resilience grows. This is why so many women experience midlife distress. Not because they chose wrong on paper, but because they never chose consciously at all. They followed the script. They played the role. And one day, something inside them asked a painful question. Whose life am I living? Women who consciously choose not to have children often ask that question earlier. And asking it early isn't avoidance. It's awareness. Now, pause here. Imagine a version of your life where no one questioned your choices. No raised eyebrows. No explanations required. No pressure to justify your path. In that version of your life, what feels most honest? Because honesty creates peace. And peace is not emptiness. It's spaciousness. It's waking up without inner conflict. It's moving through the world without constantly negotiating with yourself. Realization doesn't come from fulfilling expectations. It comes from honoring what's real. And for some women, that includes motherhood. For others, it doesn't. And both can be full, meaningful, deeply human lives. The danger isn't choosing one path over another. The danger is living a life that contradicts who you are, just to be accepted. Because acceptance fades, but self-betrayal accumulates. And here's the final truth. You don't need to prove your life is meaningful. You don't need to defend your clarity. You don't need permission to live honestly. If your choice brings you calm instead of contraction, peace instead of pressure, groundedness instead of fear, then your nervous system already knows. And that knowledge is enough. Let's take a moment to bring everything together. We talked about 5 deep psychological truths. Not opinions, not trends, but patterns that show up again and again in emotionally self-aware women. Women who don't live on autopilot. Women who pause before saying yes to a life that would require permanent self-sacrifice. Women who understand that fulfillment is not about meeting expectations, but about living in alignment with who they are. And here's what matters most. This conversation was never about convincing anyone. It was about permission. Permission to stop explaining. Permission to stop shrinking your truth to make others comfortable. Permission to trust your internal signals, especially when they go against the script. Because your nervous system is not confused. When something isn't right for you, your body knows. It tightens. It contracts. It grows restless. And when something is right, even if it's unconventional, your body softens. Your breathing deepens. There's a quiet sense of peace. That peace is not emptiness. It's regulation. And emotional regulation is the foundation of a grounded life. Many women spend years reacting to pressure, to judgment, to expectations that were never theirs to carry. They don't need more willpower. They don't need more explanations. They need emotional stability, clarity, self-trust, and that's something you can build. Not overnight, not perfectly, but intentionally. And this is where I want to support you more deeply. If you'd like to go further in your emotional development, I created a practical emotional self-mastery guide to support you. It was designed to help you regulate your emotions, stop reacting excessively, and build inner stability, step by step, at your own pace. Not by suppressing what you feel, but by understanding your emotional patterns and working with your nervous system, not against it. You'll find the guide in the first pinned comment below. Take a look when you feel ready. And before we close, I want to ask you one final question, just for yourself. If you stopped trying to be understood and focused instead on being at peace, what would change in your life? You don't need to answer out loud. Just notice what comes up. Because the goal isn't to fit into a role. The goal is to feel at home inside yourself. If this video helped you feel a little more grounded, a little more seen, a little more confident in your clarity, stay here. Subscribe to Emotional Growth. This channel exists for women who are done betraying themselves to be accepted and ready to build emotional strength from the inside out. Thank you for being here. And remember, you don't owe the world an explanation for a life that finally feels true to you.